Good evening and welcome to Resolutions for Recovery. This show is dedicated to the education of substance use disorder, and we really need to focus in on the word education tonight. 3 people every 2 days on Long Island succumb to substance use disorder, which means 3 families are also waking up without their loved ones. I lost my son 5 years ago, and coming into the holidays again, and it's again, and it's again, and it's again, missing that 21-year-old son that should be sitting at my table. And far too many people across the nation, and especially here on Long Island, are waking up without their loved ones. And we have a situation that's happening actually right here on Long Island in Blue Point, New York. And I will put out the invitation for anyone that would like to come and join me and discuss their side of the fence. But we need to discuss what's going on and why are we so afraid of a treatment facility? Because untreated substance use disorder leads to far worse things than the people that are in treatment and trying to help themselves. So my special guest tonight is Dr. Jeff Reynolds. Thanks, Jeff.
Sure, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on again.
Of course.
And resolutions, we're talking about resolutions as we head into 2018.
Exactly,
so that's pretty exciting.
But there's always hope. There's always hope for recovery.
Yeah.
We always focus on what the worst part that could happen, and it happens to far too many people.
Yeah.
That's granted, but there's always hope.
Absolutely.
Always hope, no matter what, when, where. We have a Thrive Recovery Center, thriving right now in Hauppauge, treating people in recovery every single day, and that community grows, and they are productive, and they're getting jobs, and they're going to school, and they're being moms and dads and brothers and sisters and sons and everything that they are meant to be in life.
But you know the story, and that before we were able to find a location for Thrive, we had a dozen landlords who said, I'm sorry, not in my backyard. And as you said in the intro, we're in a situation now where Seafield is trying to open a treatment facility in Blue Point and has been told by the neighborhood, no way, no how, it's not going to happen. And so there's a large convent in Blue Point, right on Middle Road.
And there's 5 acres there.
There's 5 acres. There's about 30,000 square feet, and Seafield has signed an agreement to purchase the property in hopes of turning it into a 76-bed facility for women. Now, you or I probably look at that and say, well, that's great news.
That's awesome news.
When you think about the lack of treatment options for women, and you think about the data and everything we're seeing, and here on Long Island, we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of women who are committing crimes. Women who are, holding up banks while their kid is in an Uber cab outside. Those kinds of things. And
bus drivers, women.
That's the desperation, right? And so with women come kids, and so we're talking about another generation. And so when I heard the news that Seafield wanted to open a women-specific facility, I was thrilled, and we probably could have filled that facility overnight with women who are desperately looking for help and desperately looking for care.
And I want to talk about that because different places that I've been to Veritas Villa keeps women totally separate. Every place looks to keep women separate because women are also can be traumatized. When they're stricken with the disease, they do desperate things. And they are very much taken advantage of. And there's a lot of trauma that goes along with women that may not go along with men. And
it's a completely different deal. We continue to try to shoehorn women into men's programs, and it doesn't work very well. And kind of the only differentiating factor we tend to make is, well, does she have kids? Then she goes to a separate facility.
But rightfully so, I think men are unable to share fully what maybe they want to share with women in the group too.
Absolutely.
So let's be fair.
Right. These are all folks that are very, if they're in recovery, very newly into recovery. If we think about this as a brain disease, you've got a lot of stuff going on. It can be very distracting. You're right about trauma. And we know now that we need to assume that every woman who has a substance use disorder has suffered trauma. And either that was the precipitating factor that brought her to substance use, or that was a part of her disease process. And so often I'll hear facilities say, well, we can't take her, she has an eating disorder. We can't take her, she acts out sexually. Those are all components of the disease.
Absolutely.
It's like being frustrated with an Alzheimer's patient who walks out into traffic. Well, that's the disease. That's what happens when you're touched by this disease. particularly if you're a young woman. And so, the promise of trauma-informed, women-specific care with staff that get it in a facility that is hospitable to those issues is exactly what Long Island needs. In fact, we probably needed it 20 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. But, and then we wonder, because this is something that I've brought up to politicians, or people that own facilities. We throw young people out for hooking up.
Yes.
So you're 21 years old, 22 years old, and you see a pretty girl or you see a good-looking guy, and you end up, and then you get thrown out of treatment for doing what comes very natural to anybody, but especially to young people.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about what happens to a person's self-esteem when they're using substances, external approval is really, really valuable to helping build yourself back up, particularly if it's from the opposite sex. And so we see a lot of that. It's part of the disease process for most people. That kind of compulsive acting out is part of the deal. It goes along with it. And so I'm not a big fan of folks being ejected from treatment for that.
No, I'm not
Although
either.
I recognize that, look, you need to run a facility. And if everybody is hooking up, there are potential problems and liabilities and things that go along with that. But I do think,
I think there's a better way to have consequences other than, letting them out on the street.
There probably is. But as you know, there's a real shortage of treatment slots for women. So when this facility was announced, a lot of us looked and said, well, finally, there's something, because we know that women often wind up on waiting lists at a higher rate than men do. We know that they often come with children, they often come with trauma, and there are some real barriers to care. So when this facility was proposed, I think a lot of us were thrilled to have any treatment beds, but particularly those that would be focused exclusively on women.
John Haley and Mark Epley came on the show, and we both know them personally, and it's not about the bottom line with them. They really...
If it is, they're in the wrong business.
They're in the wrong business. Yeah. But they've been touched personally by this disease in their own families. Yeah. And to hear them say when we got out and stepped into, the chapel, how they knew right away that so many people would be healed, as so many people have been healed by the nuns in that convent, that touched me in a different way, because there's a spiritual component to getting well, and we should be lifting each other up. So 76 women, each helping each other get better. Right. Oh my goodness.
There was an elected official who said, I'm concerned about the quality of life in Blue Point. And the response to that is, if you want to make it better, make sure that people get well. And when you think about 76 women at any given time, that would literally be hundreds, if not thousands of women who would successfully find a path to recovery, leave and return home to be moms or sisters or aunts or grandmothers and daughters, and they'd leave there healthy and productive, and they'd be out there working and contributing and that kind of thing. And
and giving back to the community.
It's really hard to understand how anyone would argue against people getting well. But you and I both know that this all boils down to the pervasive stigma around addiction. Ironically enough, Oasis posted online today and made available their new film about stigma and how in some cases it persists.
Reversing the stigma, yeah.
And so as we endure this battle here on Long Island, we're hearing more and more about stigma. I think our belief, and honestly my hope, was that so as this affects everybody and everybody's touched personally, that's when the stigma will begin to fall down, because people will begin to understand it. But I'm not sure it's worked out that way in this case.
Unfortunately, everyone's been touched by this disease, whether you readily admit it to the outside world or you don't. Right. But I find it very hard-pressed in this day and age for anyone not to know of someone who's struggling with this. So you can either be afraid, or educate yourself.
Right.
So the people of Blue Point should really, I know that John and, Seafield made available to them that they would rent them a coach bus, bring them out to the facility, give them a tour of the facility, a tour of the town, have the community of West Hampton Beach come to them and say, we have a good neighbor here.
Right.
This has been our experience, and not one person has gone to do that.
Well, I think that's because, once people take a position, they don't want to learn, right? And in some cases, they're probably afraid, well, I'm going to hear something that's going to soften me up, right? And now they've dug in with their neighbors, this kind of, mindset that nobody wants to break ranks. And if you look on social media, the folks are actually saying, well, maybe this isn't so bad, immediately get harangued by their neighbors, you're a traitor, how could you do this, that kind of thing. So I think you have that kind of groupthink going on. I mean, the other thing that I think plays into this is that most of us who have personal experience with somebody who struggled with addiction, all the memories aren't very fond.
Right.
Right? That you find the good and you find the person through all of those behaviors. But a lot of us went through a living hell with a loved one that struggled with addiction.
Without a doubt.
And I wonder to what extent, particularly if you haven't worked through those issues, I wonder how much of that really drives this conversation. So some of it is ignorance, some of it is lousy experiences with family members who have struggled with addiction, particularly if they didn't find a path to recovery, and how much is the groupthink. But I think taken together, it's the perfect storm. And I love the storm metaphor when we talk about opioids and heroin. And it's easy to imagine, and Blue Point is a seaside town, but if we believe that Long Island is in the middle of the storm, and we obviously do, this would be akin to, a ship being caught out in the Great South Bay and radioing and saying, geez, it's really rough out here, we're losing people, would it be okay if we docked up in your port? And this would be like Blue Point saying, yeah, no, it's not okay.
Exactly.
I feel exactly the same way, that we're in the middle of a storm. People are desperately saying, would you mind if I came in and sought some shelter and was safe? And Blue Point saying, yeah, no, not here, go somewhere else. Yeah, I think you should be safe, but do it in the next town over.
It's ironic, even we're in the Christmas season, so if we think about what happened to Mary, right? Not being able to, that's the Christmas story too. But it's just so much ignorance, and to watch the News 12 feed and to hear people actually say our children won't be safe walking to school. When did people struggling with substance use become kidnappers and pedophiles? I don't even understand. Nobody wants to take your children, and what you should be more afraid of is all the untreated people in your community, not the ones that are inside for treatment. All of the ones that are outside your doors. They just lost a young woman there.
They did. So the Friday after Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
A graduate of their high school passed away. And so it's something very real. I think the other thing that's really troubling is several people said, well, there's an elementary school in close proximity. We're even talking about putting treatment into schools now, much less, miles away.
Right.
We see instances where we're bringing treatment into schools and we're bringing parents in to get well at the same time. And I think that's the way you fight a crisis. I think this craziness, well, there's an elementary school down the block, that's just pure ignorance and fear.
And we're missing a golden opportunity to have a teaching moment, right?
Yeah. You're right. So what's the message to our kids as they overhear these conversations?
Right. Those people are bad.
Right.
They're not bad people. They're sick people. And they've been kidnapped by the most powerful drug in the world.
Right.
And they need a path to recovery because, unfortunately, we haven't even seen the depth of which this crisis is going to bring us to, with the babies being born dependent.
Right. Oh, yeah.
On
opiates. Even if we solve the problem today, we have a whole nother generation that's been impacted by this.
Yeah.
And I have to wonder, are there conversations taking place in some of those homes these days to say, well, Dad, don't you drink a lot? They're talking about treatment and you're opposing this, and, almost everybody has it in their family. So I wonder how those conversations play out, and I wonder if they're productive and helpful.
Unfortunately, with all the parents that I speak to, well, we don't have that heroin problem.
Right.
We just have, my kids just drink and smoke pot.
Right.
Well, your child's 14, and that's against the law, and you're forever changing their development of their brain.
Absolutely.
So that's okay for you? And you think by some miracle they're not going to move on to harder drugs? That's the sad part of it.
And at the same time, they're saying, look, treatment isn't a good thing. We don't want it here. And so you have to wonder, so if that kid is 17 or 18 and develops a problem, what's that child's mindset about actually getting treatment? Well, no, those are the people we ran out of town.
Right. That's not good.
You know,
I can't go
which
there.
feels a little extreme, but that's pretty much what's happening.
Yeah.
They're basically saying not here, no way, no how, and it's easy to imagine the pitchforks and the torches out.
Yes.
When you hear some of the community rhetoric around this, and I think part of it is some self-appointed community leaders trying to make a name for themselves, and I think this is, and they kind of get everybody revved up, but it's hard to believe that there isn't like a middle, cohort of people. If you've got 20% that are here and 20% that are here, that you don't have a middle ground of people who are willing to learn, willing to try to understand, and then make an informed decision about whether or not
I
they
think
want this.
any decision. Listen, I live right by Kings Park Psychiatric Center. I bought my house knowing that was there.
Sure.
It never affected my home value. It was an established facility. It needs to be somewhere. I would welcome treatment as they redo and revitalize those grounds. I would welcome treatment there.
Absolutely.
There's treatment in close proximity. I mean, we live close. Smithtown.
Right. Well, look, I had someone say to me, well, where do you live? I said, Hot Pocket. They said, would you put it in your neighborhood? I said, that's actually where we opened our first recovery center.
Yeah.
After a bunch of other places said no. And so you can open as many treatment facilities as you want in Hot Pocket, Smithtown, because we need them. I'd rather that than find the needles on the street and have to worry that my car is going to be broken into at night.
So that's, I have even just thought of the kindergarten teacher that succumbed to the disease in Sag Harbor.
Right.
Gee, Sag Harbor, that's a pretty expensive neighborhood, isn't it?
Yeah. This is happening everywhere.
A teacher that was teaching your children. So in your elementary school in Blue Point, how many people are affected by the disease that are coming to work every day?
Right.
Does anybody ever think about that?
I'd love to see someone, and I met with a councilman from that area today. I would love to see someone step up and say, what we're doing is not right. It's not just, it's not respectful, it's not good for the community. But I think there's this groupthink, and in fact, this elected official said to me, I need to respond to the wants and desires and wishes of my constituency. And I suppose there's something to be said for representing and kind of taking the majority view and pushing that forward. But I think there's also something to be said for standing up for what's right.
Yeah.
And following your conscience and saying, look, I'm going to follow my heart and my conscience on this, and I know what a lot of you want me to do, but I can't do that in good conscience. And if that means that you don't return me to my seat the next time around, I'll understand that, and I'll go do something else with my head held high. And so we see, a brand of leadership today that doesn't take risks, that responds to polls, that responds to the vocal minority. And I'd love to see someone step up and say, why don't you come and put this in my community? This is a perfect opportunity right now. So if Blue Point is hell-bent on killing this, this is a great opportunity for some elected official in some community to stand up and say, put it here.
Yeah.
Don't say not in my backyard, say right in my backyard. It's happening here and I want it in my community. And so if this particular town councilman is not of that mindset, I hope somebody will step up and say, why don't you come and put it here?
So I'll say his name. His name is Neil Foley, and that's who the, and over the summer, Ed Romaine, who is the town of Brookhaven, right? The head of the town. And they all ask for all the family members who have lost children to come and stand by them when they do this, Overdose Awareness Day. Well, my answer to them when asked to come was, every day is Overdose Awareness Day for me. Yeah. Every single day. It's not a photo op with you to say, look, see, here I am. I'm trying to, help you with your fight against substance use disorder. No, you're not trying to help me. You're not trying to help anyone. You're self-serving and helping yourself.
Well, look, I've suggested to more than one elected official, and not exclusively to Councilman Foley, but to some elected officials. You were around for the photo hops, you hugged all the moms and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There comes a time where you might have to make tough decisions, and that might mean stretching a little bit, and it might mean making some people uncomfortable and going against the grain. But we expect you to do that. If you're willing to be in the photo ops and willing to hug the moms, and willing to shed tears with them, then you ought to be able to stand up for all of us.
So, and I know what they do want to do. What he wants to do there is build a library, which is going to increase their taxes to the highest library tax in the country, not even here on Long Island.
Right.
So $180,000 annually added to their tax roll. Right. Or what's going to hurt them more now with the federal law changing and folks on Long Island, right? $10,000 max.
When folks hear what it's going to cost to put a library in there, I mean, look,
The library's not
going
gonna
to
happen.
a bond issue a year
Right.
and a half ago, 2 years ago. There's going to be a bigger bond issue. They're not going to wind up doing it. In the meantime, those sisters who are in financial straits are going to suffer more. We'll have, so if we wait a year and a half, we've lost another 750, 800 people to overdoses that could have been averted through access to treatment. And, the other thing I worry about is the world is watching this, and if one community is allowed to run a treatment facility out of its community, does that embolden others? So what happens the next time somebody wants to open a treatment facility? They look and take a page out of the Blue Point playbook and say, we just need to make enough noise. We just need to say the right things, scare the elected official in power, and then we're good.
Right.
And that's nowhere, and so...
And that's just wrong.
And I don't think, they've said there's alternative sites. You can go to an industrial area. Well, that doesn't feel right either. Right?
And
so
how
it
is an
feels like a
industrial
cobra.
area conducive to wellness?
Right. Right. I
How-
mean, we even accept vape shops in our communities and massage parlors and everything else. And suddenly, if you want to create a facility for people to get well, you asked a good question before we started, and that was, if somebody wanted to put a hospice or a cancer facility in there, would the response be the same? It might be a little bit the same, but it's remarkably different in terms of the rhetoric. So there it might be, well, there's going to be some more traffic. It wouldn't be, there's an elementary school down the block. We need to be worried about
right.
it. And so
Because
when
they may
people say,
catch cancer.
There's no discrimination. This is about quality of life. It's hard to believe given some of the rhetoric.
I find it hard to believe that community also couldn't use the dollars that employees would spend in their community.
Well, of course, if you're going to employ 60 people in a facility that size, then, the stores, the delis, I mean, every place in the area would
gas
be
stations,
benefiting. It's a good use of the property at the right time. And I think if people opened their minds and hearts a little bit and actually looked at some of the data and had conversations, I mean, there's actually some studies about the level of disruption or the lack thereof when a new treatment facility is put in.
What I find most disappointing, especially from Councilman Foley and Ed Romaine, is that at the very least, they should have taken the trip to West Hampton Beach and done their own due diligence on what that facility looks like and the impact, and spoken to the mayor there, the council people there, whoever the elected officials are out there. Yeah. That's their job to do that.
It is. And I'll say this, and I'd say it to him, Supervisor Romaine is not a shy man. He's not a quiet man. And, my feeling is he's got the kind of presence and the reputation that if he wanted this to happen, he would speak out and say, look, guys, I know the way you feel about this, but it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
We're heading into the winter season, and every elected official knows that if you don't deal with storms the right way, then you take a hit. And some of the elected officials we're talking about have weathered storms when it comes to snow plows and everything else. This is a storm too. And it's being woefully mismanaged.
Yes.
And this is the litmus test for whether or not Long Island's elected officials are going to stand up or they're going to sit down. And look, we haven't had a proposal for new treatment beds since the beginning of the crisis. Finally, it's happened, and Supervisor Romaine and Councilman Foley are being asked to take a stand on a really important issue. And I'm sorry that they're up first, but they are. And other elected officials are watching, and quite frankly, we need to make sure that they understand that people in the recovery movement are watching as well.
Absolutely. So, Ed Romaine made a PSA on the opioid epidemic. Right. So how can you can't stand on both sides of the fence at the same time, and you can't pick and choose what's popular at the moment in time.
Right. A video is safe. A press conference is safe.
Yeah.
This requires people getting out of their comfort zone. But let me tell you, this crisis has made a lot of people uncomfortable. And the only way we solve it is to get out of our comfort zone and begin to think in new ways about things. And again, I really value elected officials who look at something and say, this is what I'm going to do. If you don't like it and you vote me out, I'll find something else to do. It's all okay. But
absolutely.
Honestly, I think what people are looking for today is leadership that is honest, that doesn't respond to polls, where people do follow their hearts and they make reasoned arguments to say, I think this is the right thing to do. You may not love me, but I think it's the right thing to do. I think people value that.
I would value that more. At least
Absolutely.
you take an honest stance on something.
Absolutely.
You know, you can't speak out of both sides of your mouth.
There's a lot of elected officials I don't agree with on a lot of things, but they make very reasoned arguments about it, and you respect them. I don't agree with them all the time, but look, there was a public financing bill that went through the legislature, and I don't need to say how I feel about it, but I agreed with some and disagreed with others. But everybody made very conscious decisions and made their arguments for why it was the right thing or wrong thing to do based on their own consciousness and their own value system. And there's something to be said for standing up and saying, a lot of people may not like this, but this is what we're going to do.
You know, Suffolk County legislator Leslie Kennedy was so on board with this that she is willing to do almost anything, you know, to convince and or educate all the people that are involved with that. Having her KSAC, her and her husband got their KSACs just so that they would know about this disease. That's an elected official that I can, you know, put myself behind and say, thank you for doing that for us. They know what we need, they know what it's going to take, and how dare you make that kind of a decision without really educating yourself.
And it's not about the party. It's not about Democrat versus Republican.
No,
Look, some of our best friends are Democrats, some of their best friends are Republicans. You know, this happens to be a Republican-driven conversation because that's kind of the balance of power in Brookhaven Town. But it doesn't matter. Some of the most progressive...
It's a human issue.
Right. You know,
it's a life and death issue.
I think if I were some of these elected officials, I'd worry about being on the wrong side of history. Like, as you do this, do you look back and say, I made a mistake?
Yeah.
You know, this is a historic crisis, maybe a historic decision. Do you want to be on the right side or the wrong side?
Yeah. We're going to be right back after this message. His ears are...
My age is 18 years old and my name is Evan.
My name is Sean and I'm 19 years old.
My name is Justin, I'm 16.
My name is Angelica, I'm 18 years old.
Marijuana, and I was 13 years old.
Marijuana, and my age was 13.
The first drug I ever tried was marijuana, and I was 12 years old.
It was marijuana and I was 11 years old.
Yes, and that escalated to promethazine, lean.
I began to take pills like Xanax, Percocets.
I began using other substances such as pills and alcohol.
I then went on to cocaine and pills and quickly progressed to heroin. I was 13 years old when I first started using heroin. I had like aspirations of going to like an Ivy League school, and that quickly, within like a year or two, changed. I stopped going to my classes, I stopped going to school altogether eventually. All my friends were kind of just dropping me.
I started getting in trouble in school, eventually kicked out. I got in trouble with the law a lot.
I wasn't really hanging out with a lot of sober people, just people that use. I overdosed at 15. I've been at Outreach for 5 months. Outreach honestly really helps you. It shows that you're honestly worth something. And it's possible to become sober if you put in progress. But it's not just gonna be handed to you, you really have to want to change. Inpatient, you can't just leave. You stay here and you have to deal with it. That's what I feel like a lot of kids need.
In a long-term facility, the counselors get to know the resident better, and they get to actually work with them more than in a short-term 28-day facility. And it really gives kids a chance to work on themselves rather than being rushed through a program, just to be thrown back into life, going back into the same old bad habits that they were doing before.
Coming in here, I couldn't believe how long I would have to be here, but after a couple months, like, you know, talking to counselors, I kind of came to the realization that, like, I need a lot of time and work to repair everything I've done.
The things that we get taught here, you know, it really does help you in life, and it gives you a different perspective. It's very important for a kid to have a family involvement in treatment so they don't think they're alone in this. We communicate on a better basis than how we used to. We understand each other more. And that was from the help of Outreach.
They come every Wednesday night for support group. They come to a group every other week.
They come to parent support group to discuss their problems also. My relationship honestly has got a lot better. Because I remember my mom used to never want to say anything to me because she would be scared of my reaction. I'm starting to realize in here, like, I really have to take advantage of the fact that I have her still.
When I was about 14 is when my parents realized that I had several different problems, such as behavioral issues, and the behavioral issues kind of stemmed from my drug use. I began caring less about myself and others. Outreach has really made me realize how important family is. If I was out of state in a program where my parents were not involved, I would have never been able to strengthen my relationship with them. My father told me that I've inspired him to make changes in his life, and that meant a lot to me. I've never heard my dad be inspired by something before, and I was just proud that it was me.
Welcome back to Resolutions for Recovery, and Jeff, so I'm so happy that we get to have, like, you know, I mean, we are on the side of treatment, but,
Right.
you know, we're just giving a different viewpoint because we don't have money in the game, right?
Absolutely. Nothing at
But-
stake other than we want to see
Yeah,
less people
but we have
pass away.
a St. Ursuline's convent who are being, you know, they don't have the money to run that convent. And I don't see the people of Blue Point, you know, ponying up any
Right.
solution
Right.
for what their problem is. And I know, you know, it may be seen as a threat or whatever, but Seafield can also open a sober home. And in New York State, sober homes are unregulated.
Sure. And we need those too.
And we need those
Right.
too, but we have so many that are run by bad people.
Yeah.
And Seafield happens to run a good sober home also.
They do. And in fact, some people have said, well, isn't that better than a rehab? It's not better or worse, it's different. The thing is, you know, when you look at a facility that's 30,000 square feet and you need to have roughly 50 square feet per person, that's a lot of people in a sober home. And sober homes, typically, they're not regulated by the state.
Right.
You know, if you run a treatment facility, the state pops in, the state monitors you. You have to have certain staffing requirements, those kinds of things. All that goes out the window.
Yeah.
And you don't even need a person
You need a
on
house
site
manager.
in order to run it. You don't even actually need that. You can just put a bunch of people in a house and they go by their merry way. And I don't think Seafield would ever do that. But I think, you know, some folks in Blue Point and the town are pushing Seafield in a direction of saying, well, if we can't do a licensed treatment facility, there is a dire need for sober homes, and maybe we just do that instead. If I was a neighbor, I would much rather there be a licensed, regulated treatment facility there
Absolutely.
with social work staff
Yeah.
and physicians and that kind of thing. So, you know, either way, I think it's beneficial to the community. But if I were a neighbor, I would clearly want the treatment piece of it more than I'd want the sober home piece of it. That's not to say that living next to a sober home is a terrible thing. It's not, and Seafield has an impeccable track record. But it would be a shame because you can set up sober homes in any number of communities. This is the perfect site for a licensed treatment facility with
Yes.
physicians, with social work staff.
Psychiatrists.
You know, a professionally run
Yes.
facility versus something that's a little bit more informal, and that the community, if they kind of knew the ins and outs, they'd understand. You know that I co-chair the Sober Home Oversight Board in Suffolk County. There's some good sober homes, there's some not so good sober homes, but it's a very, very different model. And there are folks out there in the community now saying they can't put more than 6 people in there. Well, there's a lot of court decisions that say that they actually can, and
Yeah.
that you can't regulate who lives together, and that there's an essential freedom there. And
And
it
there
doesn't
is-
require a zoning change.
There's freedom there.
Right.
You know, so I know that I have heard or read on social media that there are 76 women and all their men are going to come and visit them. Well, that's a lie.
Yeah, that's not allowed.
That's
right?
not
Right.
allowed. They're not allowed to freely leave, you know, come and go from the facility.
Right.
When you're in treatment, you're in treatment. You're not leaving the premises there.
Right.
The only people that would be leaving the premises are the employees.
Right.
In a sober home, it's game on. They
Sure,
can,
people
they
come
can
and go as
and
they please,
It's
right? And you hope
exactly
they've
right.
gotten good treatment and they're able to kind of hold it together. But I would think, you know, if I were a neighbor, I would much rather have the treatment option available to me. So, you know, people are viewing this as a threat on the part of Seafield. They think Seafield is at least partway into a deal at this point in time.
Yes.
Is looking to help save lives. This is the business they're in. They've identified both a location, and you know the community need is not up for debate. The need is there, and so you know regardless of what it turns into, I hope it will be a facility that helps to save lives.
I do too. You know, and they're trying to help a bunch of nuns too.
Right.
You know, I mean.
Well, and those nuns have been struggling for some time.
Yeah.
And, you know, honestly, there are community members who are spending a lot of time on social media. You know, some time and energy and money put into helping those nuns back in the day might have produced a very, very different outcome.
Without a doubt. But to show up when they were trying to say goodbye to their community and all the people that they had helped, to have people outside protesting, was shame on them for that.
Yeah.
To not show the nuns a little bit of respect for having been there. I don't even know. They've been there like 70 years or something like that.
Yeah, and the legacy of that order actually is
Yes.
very focused on women, and so they did women's retreats there and really ministered to women. And so, you know, it's hard to imagine a scenario where you have, you know, again, folks with pitchforks and torches kind
Yeah.
of running nuns out of town and berating them.
And you know, in this day and age, with all the sexual exploitation that's going on with all people in power and women, you know, women have always kind of been beat up
Right.
in a man's world.
Right. And here again, we're trying to put together a place where women can get well, and suddenly that's
And they're getting beat up
unacceptable.
again. And they're getting beat up again. You know, I think that unfortunately the residents of Blue Point are thinking that no one in their community struggles with substance use disorder.
Yeah, somehow in the midst of a national epidemic, a
Epidemic.
crisis, Blue Point was carved out and wasn't affected by that
And
in any way, shape,
Brookhaven,
or
with the
form.
highest number of overdose deaths,
Yes.
Brookhaven Township, highest number of
Yes.
overdose death in the state of New York.
Yes. You know, if there's any place you should do it, it should be there. I
Yeah.
mean, look, we should have a treatment facility, given the nature of the crisis, in every community across Long Island.
Absolutely.
You know, Councilman Foley had said, you know, the people in Blue Point are angry. And I said, well, there's a whole bunch of us that are kind of upset too, because there haven't been a lot of new proposals. And this is kind of the first time Long Island is being asked to approve a treatment facility in the middle of a crisis. And so understand that if there's a strong reaction, it's because we all see this as a potential turning point in the crisis. And basically you're saying no to that. Basically
Yeah.
you're saying it's okay to let people perish. And so I think this is a litmus test for Long Island. And I worry, you know, if Blue Point is successful, then, you know, if we try to put it in Port Jeff or Garden City or Smithtown, you know, does that community then say, yeah, we don't want it here either? And, you know, and the
step
band
up.
plays on,
Right.
and then the deaths continue and that kind of thing. You know, I think, you know, more than ever before, we all have a mutual obligation to each other to be our brother's keeper, in this case, our
Yes.
sister's keeper, and reach out and say, yeah, I don't know that I love this, but I'm ready to help. I'll roll up my sleeves and do what needs to be done. It's a crisis, and in a crisis, you do what needs to be
At the
done.
very least, they need to roll up their sleeves and make an informed decision.
Right.
Not a decision based on fear. That's real easy to do, but we have to stop that. They need to make an educated decision. But we haven't even, you know, so there are residents of Blue Point that have come out with what they want to say.
Yeah.
They haven't met us yet, though.
Right.
And there are a lot of families on Long Island that will step up to the plate, and they will go there and speak to them. And, you know, they're going to hear from a lot more than just the residents of Blue Point.
And they need to. You know, Councilman Foley was very gracious today. He gave me more than an hour of his time. He's very respectful. It was a good conversation, honestly. And I don't think
I'm sure
he's a bad guy. I think he's a good
yes.
guy. And, you know, went
Making
into
a
public
bad
service
decision.
in order to
I'll
make
say it.
and in order to try to make a difference. And he said, look, I'm willing to meet with anyone and talk with anyone. And so the folks in Blue Point who oppose this are speaking out very, very clearly. I think the folks on the fence or who are supportive in Blue Point need to become equally as
Loud.
vocal.
Yes.
But we also need to understand that creating a facility for women, though it's located in Blue Point, impacts every single community across Long Island.
Yes.
And so folks that believe that women have a right to treatment and this is a good thing ought to be reaching out to Councilman Foley and saying in a respectful way, just so you know, I support this. I know you're hearing from the other side, but you need to know there's a whole group of us that have been personally affected or not, but we really care about this. Same thing goes for Supervisor Romaine. I think people, look, we have an obligation to let our elected officials know how we feel. Their job is to represent. And so we need to make sure that we're communicating.
How many
with them.
women were turned away for treatment? How many women, you know, that can't be productive members of society and good moms?
They're dying waiting on
They're
waiting
dying,
lists.
waiting-
You know?
waiting
if
on
you
a
talk
waiting
to the
list.
Suffolk County Department of Social Services, they will talk about the dramatic increase in CPS cases that have come about as a result of the opioid crisis, and that you have moms, and usually single moms, who are heavily addicted, who don't have the ability, because they have a brain disease, to properly care for their children. You know who pays for that? We all do.
Yes.
We
And
all
that
pay.
was.
How many women are locked up in the
Yeah.
Suffolk County Jail right now? How many women will show up in an emergency room tonight and need to be treated
Yes.
and won't have proper insurance? We pay for that 10 times over. When you think
Yes.
about not only the human cost of this, but the expense and the money we could save by having good treatment, I mean, there's a twofold kind of thing here.
Without a doubt. So, you know, when a child is picked up for CPS and has to go into a shelter, that's probably along the lines of $10,000 a month by the time you get done with paying a foster family and the supervision and all,
Well,
all
and the
of
trauma,
that.
right? So
and
a
the trauma,
kid that's
you know,
bounced around like
absolutely.
that potentially has different outcomes when they turn 18 or 21. We
Yes.
see that in the foster care system all the time.
Yes.
So, you know, the question is, you know, I believe that stigma and denial is part of the reason this got so bad for Long Island. Because we said, you know, it's somebody else's problem,
Yes.
not in my backyard, not my kid, like we've done everything else in the history of Long Island.
Right.
HIV, homelessness, poverty, you name it. We've done this across the board. We did it with heroin, and we gave it a 10-year running head start. And then we said,
Yes.
oh no, we have a problem. We ought to do something about it. And we held press conferences and made videos. Now's the time to do something about it.
Yeah.
Now's go time. Either we're going to respond or we're not. And I worry that we're making the same exact mistakes that got us here in the first place. We haven't learned anything.
No, we haven't learned anything, and the problem gets worse. And now fentanyl gets thrown into the mix.
Right.
So how many more people
Right.
are dying from just, you know, and fentanyl is not just in heroin, is it?
Well, look, it's showing
Showing
up
up
in
in-
cocaine, and tomorrow it will be something else. There will always
The
be
drug
another
is
drug. Right.
the drug is unimportant, but right now we really have a big issue.
The point is the fatal
Yeah.
consequences.
Yeah.
Right? So typically drugs or alcohol for that matter took 30 years to kill you. Right?
Exactly.
Maybe you could beat the odds for a while. You know, fentanyl's a game changer, and you have folks that are using it who don't understand what they're using, or that their heroin is contaminated and perishing almost immediately. You know, we're heading into a holiday season, and typically this time of year we see more fatalities than in any other time of year.
Well, because, you know, unfortunately for many people, the holidays really kind of suck.
Right.
You know,
Right.
they're not the Norman Rockwell picture.
Right.
So you know, you have families that are broken up from substance use disorder, from many things. You have families that are in my boat that, you know, the holidays used to be a fun time, but there's someone missing from my heart. Yes, and life is still good and I have to celebrate,
Right.
but there's always that loss that happens there too.
Right.
So why do we continue? I don't want another parent in my club.
Right.
Because nobody's supposed to be in my club. Our kids are supposed to bury their parents, and that's the way that life is supposed to be. This is a very unnatural club to be in. So how, in the midst of an epidemic, can anyone in their right mind say the things that they say still?
Yeah, and you got to think, you know, is there a moral and ethical
Am I a bad
obligation
person?
here, right?
What did I do wrong as a parent, Jeff? Am I a bad
Right.
parent? Do I live in the ghetto?
Right.
Am I all of the things that is a stereotypical person would think of as a relative of someone that succumbed to substance use disorder? I don't think so.
And we would hope that breaking those stereotypes has made people more aware and more compassionate. But
compassionate is the word.
Right.
How can you not have compassion for people that are going through a time in their life when their whole world gets turned upside down?
You know, some of the folks in Blue Point have said, you know, when we talk this way, we're talking on an emotional level, and this is not an emotional issue, it's a zoning issue. And they've tried to kind of move it to that category. You know, and I've said before to some of them, you're missing the entire point. People are dying left and right, and you may want to put that aside, but I don't, because that's more important than anything else. It's more important than the technical town of Brookhaven code to me. The fact that people are dying creates an imperative where all of that becomes secondary to me.
Absolutely.
You can't strip that away, and we shouldn't strip that away, because those people didn't die in vain.
Exactly. How many, you know, I know that we both know the young woman whose children right now are living in Georgia.
Right.
And she is a strong woman in recovery right now, working really hard on Long Island to get her children back.
Yep. Yep.
Why do we have to continue to do this? She made mistakes. She's owned her mistakes. She sought treatment. She works really hard on herself.
Yep.
And what more can we ask?
Right.
Right. What more can we ask from people?
If we believe this is a brain disorder, right, and all the science says it is, and I think we finally evolved around that, then access to treatment is key towards getting out of the crisis, right? There's two ways to get out of the crisis. One is prevention, and we're doing more of that. But the other piece is treating those who are sick.
By the way, I spoke with Kim Laube in Blue Point School District.
So we're doing some of the prevention stuff.
Yeah, we did. You know, we were there prom day.
Now the question is, are we willing to treat the people who are really sick? Because that's the only way out. There's no other way out of this. That's the way it works. Prevention and treatment.
Exactly.
And if you don't expand treatment, you can't expect the problem's going to get any better. So 2018, instead of 509 deaths, there'll be 550. And then in 2019, the number will grow to 600. At what point do we say, well, that's just too many? Why is one okay?
Why is one okay?
And what will it take to open people's eyes and their minds and their hearts? I wonder how bad it's got to get before people say, oh, it's an emergency. Whatever we need to do, we should do.
It's so much past an emergency at this point in time. If we don't start to change the minds of that elementary school that's down the block from St. Ursuline's, 10 years from now, we're going to be in a worse boat.
Right.
They're not going to know what to do.
Right.
So what is the answer?
So
what can the rest of Long Island do right now?
Look, I think they need to speak up.
Outraged.
You know, there's a few folks in Blue Point who are, you know, driving around billboard trucks, and they're very vocal, and they're posting on social media and that kind of thing. I think we need to talk about the other side, and I think those who have been personally affected need to stand up and say, look, we've been fighting for more treatment for a long time. We've been looking for a way out of this crisis. And, you know, this facility alone won't put an end to the crisis, but it's a big piece of what we need going forward. And I think, you know, Councilman Foley said to me today, I hope people will contact me, and I think we should take him up on that, and people should let him know how they feel. I think the same thing goes for Supervisor Romaine. Both very accessible folks, and I think willing to have the conversation. But also the other town board members and other elected officials, because we need to make sure that our elected officials know that, yes, we're going to put, you know, our arms around you at a press conference, and yes, we'll pose for the photo, but we also need to hold you accountable. And friends do that with friends.
Absolutely.
And when friends are doing the wrong thing, they tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, I think you got this one wrong. And I believe that some of our elected officials in the town of Brookhaven have this one wrong. Yeah. And I think it's up to us to tap them on the shoulder and say, can I give you 2 or 3 things to think about?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's the facility in Blue Point is not going to only serve Blue Point residents. Right. So every person that lives on Long Island that wants to see a place for women to go to needs to go and visit their local officials.
Absolutely. If you want Long Island to be a healthier and safe place, we need to make it that way, which means we got to do some things.
So you can go see your local people for sure, but don't stop there. You can see your assemblyman and your state senator also.
Right.
Let them know how you feel. Everyone needs to be on the same page with this. We've done a lot of really great work in New York State with access to treatment, with doctor education. We're going to be getting a recovery high school here on Long Island. what are people going to say when a recovery high school comes?
Not in my backyard.
Right. That a 16-year-old isn't entitled to get well and live a long and productive life? Really?
Let's hope not. I mean, the other thing, and I alluded to this earlier, any other town could step up and say, we're happy to do something, and we have brand new supervisors in the town of Huntington, in the town of Smithtown. We have a great supervisor in the town of Islip. We should challenge the other towns a little bit to say, so Brookhaven has a problem with this, would you? Because this is a test. This is a test about how much Long Island really cares. We say it's a crisis, an epidemic. We use all the right words. We have all the right red ribbon parties. Are we willing to step up when it's time to step up? And right now in the town of Brookhaven, the answer is they're not willing to step up.
No, they're not willing to
Maybe
step
somebody
up.
else is. And maybe someone sets the stage to say, look, I know people are going to push back on this, and I get it, but we ought to do this because it's the right thing to do. I'd love to see an elected official do that. And let me tell you, the first person who does that is going to be congratulated and lauded and probably win the next election by a landslide.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. But I think we also have a lot of elected officials that I wouldn't be surprised that they won't take that challenge, because I think they've
It's our
made
job to push them.
Yeah,
And
we
it's
have to hold
our
them
job to
accountable.
hold them accountable, and then quite frankly, it's our job to remind people that this is what history shows. This is kind of the voting record and that kind of thing. And look, God knows we've held some of our state officials to their feet to the fire. When some state senators didn't want to do the I-STOP legislation, we had some really tough conversations and did a Mother's Day press conference to say, moms shouldn't have to go another Mother's Day without their kids. You need to do this. And we pushed hard, and we did it in a thoughtful and respectful yet forceful kind of way. I think that's the brand of advocacy that works, and so this needs to be a forceful message. It needs to be reasoned. But, I lived through the AIDS crisis, and it wasn't until we got a little tougher on elected officials that we really began to see change.
Do elected officials realize that HIV is making a recurrence with the use of...
I don't think so. I don't think so.
And, and unfortunately, you did a great job with eradicating HIV, that they don't teach that in health anymore.
That's right. It's like it disappeared. And now we have kids sharing needles and having unprotected sex.
Unprotected sex, all of those things that caused the crisis to begin with.
Right.
So do we really want to go down the same road again? It's, it's mind-boggling to me.
But then we say, well, how
honestly
did this happen? Boy, we didn't see it coming.
We didn't see
We
it
actually
coming.
did.
We did see it coming.
Right.
We did see
chose
it
not
coming.
to act.
When we allow on Facebook, our kids to really dictate, well, everybody goes out and drinks, and parents take a back seat to that. Right. And they say, well, it's only alcohol. Right. It's only. There are consequences for it's only.
Yep. This issue in the town of Brookhaven is an opportunity for the community to rally around treatment and to rally around people who are struggling or have struggled with substance use disorders, and to rally around recovery.
Yeah.
This is our moment to shine as a region. We've been pulling news clips from other regions where treatment facilities have been opposed. Imagine one from Long Island that says treatment facility welcomed. That's how much this has hit our region. We not only need an elected official to stand up and say that, but as a region, we should distinguish ourselves in that way and say, we had a crisis and we dealt with it head on. We dealt with it in a way that no other community did, and that we rolled out the red carpet for people who were struggling and said, come on, let me help you get well.
In the state of New York, and this is something that we should be proud of as Long Islanders, we do lead the fight with advocacy, because we're just that much, we come together as a region far better than any place else in this great state of ours. So if we are the leader to show other states who follow what we do here with legislation, with access to treatment, if we're leading the way there, wow, the people in West Virginia who really are slammed, right?
Right.
Imagine if this became the normal throughout the country.
Yep.
Because again, all the parents that say, well, my child's only 5 years old, I don't have to worry about this. You especially need to worry about it.
Yep.
Because the world changed so exponentially quick. For you have a little guy.
Right, absolutely. And let me tell you,
do you not speak to him about this?
Absolutely. And look, how do we not?
How do we not?
They're probably going to watch this show. How do you not?
How do you not speak to them?
And you have to do that. And
in a mindful, age-appropriate manner.
That's exactly right. But honest and forthright and age-appropriate, and an understanding that there's a bigger world. And
Yes.
that, you know, when you
That
teach
everything's
kids,
not all perfect
right,
and
all
rosy.
the time, right? And it can be, but look, this is a brain disease that there's no rhyme nor reason to. And I know that as a parent, I can do everything right, and this could still happen in my family. And
Absolutely.
darn it, I want to make sure that if it does, there are the best resources in the world in my own community. I don't want to have to send my kid to California or Arizona or somewhere else in order to get well.
You know, we just spoke of this gentleman, and I know he won't mind if I mention his name. He really did. We did a great educational series, and John Venza, who has been in the field for 35 years. He runs Outreach Adolescent Treatment Facility. He's a therapist for 35 years and lost his son, unfortunately, just a year ago.
Yes.
So when we talk about somebody who knew everything to do right,
Yep.
and when his son really went down the path, brought him back, and he still lost his son. If anybody doesn't think that that can happen in their family,
Right.
it can happen in anybody's family.
Yep.
Governor Cuomo is so on our side, you know, bringing resources to us because having, you know, been married to the Kennedy family, it runs, you know,
Absolutely.
probably a little more prevalent in his family, but he understands the disease.
And care ought to be accessible. You know, when you think about primary health care versus behavioral health care, there's a walk-in facility literally in every corner, now in every
Absolutely.
drugstore. But yeah, when we talk about behavioral health, right, you have to fly halfway across the country to get it, or you have to be on a waiting list for 2 weeks, or you have to jump through hoops
And
in order
how
to
many
get it.
people will be released from institutions now to walk on our street? So
Right.
it's not that this person went crazy and slashed somebody in New York City.
Right.
It's untreated mental illness.
Right.
Or untreated mental or substance use disorder
Right.
that leads people to be desperate.
Yep.
They're desperate. It's not, it's that they need that drug. I just remember watching my son not be my son
Right.
and being driven by the demon that demanded what he get for his body.
But we know treatment works. right?
Yes,
And
treatment
and there's a direct
works.
relationship between timely access to treatment
Yes.
of proper duration and proper quality, appropriate follow-up care with someone's ability to get well.
Yes. With a thrive, with a,
Right.
you know, substance use disorder is a fatal progressive disease.
Right.
Fatal progressive disease, left untreated,
Right.
becomes fatal. Period, end of conversation. Kind of very similar to cancer, kind of very similar to untreated diabetes.
Right.
But we don't turn that away. And we don't feel bad for people who refuse to lose weight and exercise. We just give them more insulin.
Right.
But why? Why in this day and age can't we see past that?
And you wonder, you know, as people who are struggling with substance use kind of look at how this whole thing is playing out, you worry about what that does to them, right? We're saying treatment is a bad thing. We want to keep it out of our community. You know, you should be secretive about it because people will judge you. And
Yes.
we know that that's one of the things that not only got us to the place we are today, but that's one of the key reasons people don't go into treatment. Aside from the disease itself and the denial that goes along with it, we know that stigma and the fear of being judged and the fear of having a record is part of what keeps people out of treatment. And, you know, here we have an entire community rallying against treatment.
You know,
and
when you know, and I'll use my son, but when people are driven in the middle of their disease to do things that they have to do,
Yeah.
that when they come out of that and they're, you know, trying to get well, they beat themselves up for all the mistakes that they made.
Yep.
So we have to, we know better, we have to do better now.
Yeah. I hope the folks watching this will call their elected
Yes.
officials, call
So
the town of
do
Brookhaven,
a
have a
call of
conversation
action.
with Supervisor Romaine, with Councilman Foley, with your own elected officials. Just
Yes.
say Long Island needs treatment. Let me tell you the other side of the story, and let me tell you how treatment will make Long Island a healthier and safer place. And boy, we need some of our elected officials to stand up.
And we are going to hold everybody accountable. So a very blessed Merry Christmas for everyone. But please, please make 3 phone calls tomorrow. Make 3 phone calls on Friday. Call all next week. Let's hold them accountable. It's time to put the foot on the gas and hold everybody's feet to the fire. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we will see you in the new year. But there'll be a show on next week. Have a great night. Thank you, Jeff.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, I think